I landed at O'Hare after 14 months overseas, clutching a ticket home for my sister Chloe's dream wedding. Then my phone vibrated. A text from my father. Don't come. The venue reached capacity, and the guest list is final. It's better if you head straight back to base. I wasn't just uninvited. I was erased. I swallowed the humiliation, boarded a transport back, and kept silent. But 4 hours later, my father saw a viral national news photograph from that morning's ceremony at the White House. Suddenly, my sister called, hysterically crying. How could you do this to our family? Growing up, the hierarchy in our household was never a secret. My younger sister, Chloe, was the family masterpiece. She was delicate, charming, and possessed an innate talent for making people want to take care of her. My father, Arthur Davis, treated her like fine porcelain. Every ballet recital, every private school tuition bill, every minor whim was accommodated without question. I was cast in a very different mold. Practical, quiet, and fiercely independent, I chose a path my father neither understood nor respected. When I earned my commission in the United States Air Force, my father didn't attend my graduation ceremony. To him, military service wasn't an honorable calling. It was a blue-collar dead end, a waste of intellect for someone who could have climbed corporate ladders in Chicago. You're signing away your life to take orders for pennies, he had scoffed, waving his hand as if dismissing a bad investment. Chloe, on the other hand, had fulfilled his ultimate ambition. She was marrying Bradley Vance, the heir to a commercial real estate dynasty. For the past 9 months, my father had spoken of nothing else. The wedding at the Grand Oaks Country Club was his crowning achievement, a ticket into the city's old-money social circles. I was deployed overseas during most of the planning, but I was determined to be there. I spent 4 months negotiating schedules, trading shifts, and navigating chains of command to secure rare 72-hour emergency leave. I didn't care about the high society spectacle or the lavish flower arrangements. I just wanted to stand in the front row and watch my little sister get married. I thought, despite our differences, that family always came first. When my boots touched the tarmac at O'Hare, 26 hours of continuous military transport vanished behind a wave of relief. I had my service dress uniform pressed in a garment bag over my shoulder, the fabric crisp and immaculate. I pulled out my phone, eager to text my dad that I was heading straight toward the Grand Oaks venue. Instead, the screen lit up with his message. Maya, do not come to the venue today. Grand Oaks strictly capped the ballroom capacity, and the guest list is finalized. It's better if you head back to base. I stood frozen in the crowded baggage terminal, commuters brushing past me in a blur. My fingers felt numb as I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his background filled with a faint clinking of champagne glasses and bustling catering staff. Dad, I'm at O'Hare, I said, keeping my voice level. I flew across 3 continents. What do you mean the list is finalized? Maya, please don't create drama today, he whispered harshly, clearly stepping away from the crowd. Bradley's family brought additional regional partners from the firm. We had to accommodate city council members and key investors. You understand how critical this network is for Chloe's future. You gave away my seat, I stated quietly. We needed the table space for people who actually move the needle, he replied coldly. You wearing a military uniform here would just confuse the aesthetic anyway. Go back to your duties, Maya. We'll celebrate some other time. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, took a slow breath, turned around, and walked back to the transport gate. What my father didn't know, and what I had deliberately kept quiet, was the real reason my transport had landed stateside 3 days earlier than my official deployment ended. I hadn't just flown home for a wedding. 72 hours prior, I was standing in the East Room of the White House in full dress uniform. Alongside 4 members of my specialized logistics and tactical evacuation unit, I was presented with the Defense Distinguished Service Commendation. It was an honor so rare for a captain of my age that the ceremony was attended by the Secretary of Defense, senior Joint Chiefs, and key congressional leaders. During a critical multi-agency operation 6 months earlier, my team had engineered the successful extraction of 42 personnel from an unstable zone without a single casualty. The citations were formal, the metals heavy, and the official press pool had covered the entire proceedings. But the administration had placed a temporary news embargo on the high-resolution event photographs until the following weekend to coordinate with the broader Department of Defense public briefing. I had mentioned none of this to my family. I knew my father's obsession with prestige, and I knew how easily he would have tried to hijack the narrative. But more than that, I didn't want to cast a shadow over Chloe. A sister's wedding day belongs entirely to the bride. I didn't need congratulations, a toast in my honor, or public applause at their reception. I had simply planned to sit quietly at the family table, blend into the background, and support the girl I had helped raise. Instead, I sat on an empty military shuttle headed back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, staring at my reflection in the dark glass window, fully realizing that my modesty had made it easy for them to discard me. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, the Grand Oaks Ballroom was glowing beneath crystal chandeliers. My father was in his element, nursing a tumbler of aged scotch and working the perimeter of the head table. He had spent the last 2 hours laughing at polite jokes with Richard Vance, Bradley's father, a seasoned real estate titan with deep political ties across the Midwest. Arthur was busy presenting himself as a patriarch of immense refinement, basking in the reflected glow of the Vance family name. Then, the multimedia display screens positioned around the cocktail lounge shifted from ambient wedding slideshows to a scheduled national news bulletin. A prominent wire alert flashed across the screen. Department of Defense honors outstanding strategic command. Richard Vance paused mid-sentence, his gaze locking onto the television monitors above the marble bar. "Hold on a second, Arthur," Richard said, adjusting his glasses. "Look at the screen. Isn't that your last name?" My father glanced up casually, expecting a routine regional broadcast. Instead, the screen displayed a pristine, high-definition photograph from the White House East Room. There I was, standing at attention in my tailored dress blues, the Defense Distinguished Service medal gleaming on my chest, flanked by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and senior leadership. The lower third graphic read clearly in bold white letters, Captain Maya Davis, United States Air Force. The chatter near the lounge thinned to a sudden silence. Richard Vance turned back to my father, his eyes wide with genuine awe. "Arthur, why didn't you mention this? Senator Hayes was just speaking about her tactical unit at a private dinner last month. He's over by the terrace right now. Where is she seated? I'd be honored to introduce her to our entire delegation." My father's glass froze halfway to his lips. The color drained completely from his face, leaving behind a stark, hollow gray. For the first time in his life, Arthur Davis had no smooth answer, no corporate deflection, and nowhere to hide. The fallout at the reception was immediate and suffocating. Within minutes, the atmosphere inside the Grand Oaks Ballroom shifted from polished elegance to palpable tension. Word had traveled rapidly from Richard Vance to the civic leaders and executives seated around the main floor. The prestigious guests Arthur had sacrificed his own daughter to impress were now actively inquiring why the honored officer wasn't present at her sister's head table. When Arthur was forced to stammer out vague excuses about scheduling conflicts, the skeptical glances spoke volumes. To people who understood protocol and high-level decorum, excluding a nationally recognized sibling wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a glaring, embarrassing display of poor character. My phone started ringing while I was unpacking my service bag at the base transit quarters. It was Chloe. I swiped to answer. Her voice was jagged, completely unraveled by hysteria. "Maya, how could you do this to our family?" she sobbed into the phone, the muffled bass of the wedding band bleeding through the background. "Dad is having a breakdown, and Bradley's father thinks we're awful people. Why didn't you tell anyone about the White House? Everyone is asking where you are." "Chloe, I was at the airport this morning," I answered evenly, my voice calm against her frantic breathing. "I had a ticket, my dress uniform, and a wedding gift. Dad texted me that the guest list was closed and told me to leave." "You should have pushed back. You should have insisted," she cried, shifting blame as she had done our entire lives. "You let us look ridiculous in front of everyone who matters." "No, Chloe," I said quietly, looking at my reflection in the mirror. "Dad made a calculation about who mattered. He just miscalculated. I ended the call as my father's contact flashed on call waiting. By Sunday morning, my father was standing outside the security perimeter at the base visitor center. He hadn't slept. His tailored suit from the reception was replaced by a rumpled windbreaker, and his usual air of boardroom authority was utterly shattered. When I stepped into the briefing room where visitors were cleared, he lunged forward, his hands trembling. "Maya, we have to fix this," he pleaded, his voice raspy. "Richard Vance won't return my calls. The narrative has completely spun out of control. We need to hold a family press dinner in Chicago this week. You wear your service blues, we take photos, and we announce that your absence was due to an urgent classified briefing. I did what I did on Friday for the good of the family's future. You have to understand that." I looked at him across the metal table, feeling an overwhelming sense of clarity. "You didn't do it for the family, Arthur," I said, dropping the title of dad entirely. "You did it for your own vanity. And speaking of the family's future, there's one more detail you should know." I slid a simple, printed financial receipt across the table. 6 months ago, when Chloe panicked because the Grand Oaks required an immediate $40,000 deposit that you couldn't cover, an anonymous wire transferred the balance. You took credit for finding a private investor. That wasn't an investor. That was my deployment combat savings, transferred through our family trust so Chloe wouldn't lose her dream. Arthur stared down at the document, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled against the steel. The man who had judged every life choice by status was finally face to face with the currency of quiet sacrifice. I stood up from the table and stepped toward the heavy security door. "Maya, wait," Arthur stammered, scrambling to gather the paper from the desk. "You can't just walk away from us. We're your blood." "You made your guest list final, Arthur," I said evenly, not looking back. "I'm just respecting your terms." I walked through the checkpoint, leaving behind the manufactured guilt and shallow status games that had defined my childhood. Over the next few weeks, I declined every invitation for damage control dinners and photo opportunities. Chloe went on her European honeymoon, though Bradley's family maintained a noticeable, frosty distance from my father's business ventures. I realized that true worth is never determined by the approval of people who only value you when you're useful to their image. My integrity, my service, and my peace were built on solid ground. And that was more than enough.